What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. It's a pretty tough week in the trade markets. There have been a lot of pretty obvious buy lows in other weeks, but this week I'm only seeing 3 clear options, but actually a ton of players I'd look to sell. So we don't normally look too heavily into the sell candidates, but this week I'm seeing a lot of them, so we'll go over that. Start off with the buys, though. Number one remains absolutely Rashee Rice. I maintain that once he's ramped up, which I think is only going to take like 1 week, he's going to be a top 8 wide receiver in fantasy. And given the landscape of wide receiver with, again, a second consecutive season of a ton of injuries, way more injuries than average, there is a very real path to Rashee Rice being a top 3, top 4 wide receiver starting in week, again, 7 or 8. He's back in week 7. Maybe they ramp him up for 1 week, but the odds are he's going to go out there and pretty much have a full snap share. And then come week 8, he'll be 100%. So I think starting in that time, there is a chance he's a top 3 wide receiver. And also, Mahomes has looked really good this season. It's not really showing up in the box score, and you kind of look at his overall numbers and you're like, that doesn't look good at all. But that's because he's been throwing to a bunch of scrubs, the corpse of Travis Kelce. Like, you know, you finally see the one game he's had this season where he had Xavier Worthy. And again, Rashee Rice is better than Xavier Worthy. Like, just adding Xavier Worthy, who's also banged up, he already like breaks out, has a really good game, both Worthy and Mahomes. So I think once you add in Rice on top of that, this offense is going to go back to having a really high-end ceiling. And it's worth noting, you know, they're not 4-0. They're 2-2 right now. They play in a really difficult division. They get 2 divisional games against both the Chargers and the Broncos in the fantasy playoffs. They're not going to be necessarily, like, we don't know right now in like must-win mode. But the odds are, given that those 2 teams are probably going to have really good records towards the end of the season, odds are in those 2 games, they're going to think that they're kind of in must-win mode, like they're going to be going full out in those games. It's super unlikely that one of the Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos pull ahead by so much that those games don't matter. So those are going to be very important matchups. And both the Chargers and the Broncos are very much slot funnels. They're very good against outside wide receivers, but you can target slot wide receivers against them. So both are going to be smash matchups for Rashee Rice. I've been saying for a while now, basically this season, that like you kind of want to be undefeated, like, you know, in week 3 or week 4, I guess. I wouldn't want to be like 0-3 going after Rashee Rice because you knew you had a lot of time without him. But there's only 2 more games. So at this point, I don't know that I'd want to go after him if I'm like 0-4 because those 2 games are very important. You don't want to go 1-6. You can still, or 0-6. You can still make playoffs starting off 0-6. I made playoffs and won the championship one year starting off 1-6. But again, if you're 0-4, probably don't trade for him. But at 1-3 or better, I'm still fine with it because it's only 2 more missed games before you have a Mac. I'd be buying if I had at least 1 win, but it gets even more and more relevant as you expand beyond that. If you are 4-0 right now and you're not trying your absolute hardest to trade for Rashee Rice, then you're doing it wrong. My goal would be like a 2-for-1 trade involving hopefully like a wide receiver 2 and maybe a flex running back, maybe a 1-for-1 trade for like a mid-range running back, a mid-range running back 2, mid-range wide receiver 2. But yeah, it comes down to like, what do you have? What do they have? Where's your depth? Where are they lacking? Second biggest buy low right now, I think, is Tet McMillan. Undeniable. He's going to be a superstar in this league. And while he hasn't had his breakout game yet, I can promise you it's coming. He has at least 8 targets in every single game this season. He's running a route on virtually every drop back. He gets downfield looks, mid-range looks. Like, he is not being used right next to the line of scrimmage, which we like to see. He's going to have a feature role in the red zone. We haven't seen it necessarily yet because they haven't had a ton of plays where they get in close and throw the ball, but it's coming. There's just no way that they do not lean on Tet McMillan in the red zone this season. His biggest issue is obviously how bad the offense is, how bad Bryce Young has been. But that's a far greater concern for Chuba Hubbard, who we're going to get to in a little bit. We can project a trailing game script in virtually every game this season for the Panthers, which is still a positive for Tet McMillan, right? It's obviously better for the wide receivers to be in a trailing game script than it is the running backs. I also think Bryce Young, I mean, he might get benched at some point. If he keeps playing as bad as he is, they're going to move on to Andy Dalton. And even though Andy Dalton's not like that good of a quarterback, we have seen him elevate this offense in the past. Just last season, Andy Dalton made 5 starts from weeks 3 through 7. Deontay Johnson in weeks 1 and 2 had 19 and 15 receiving yards, and we were like, what is happening? That's your one. And to be clear, Tet McMillan is much, much better right now than Deontay was last season. But we were still like, what is happening to this offense? All of a sudden, they go to Andy Dalton. Deontay breaks out 122 yards in a score in week 3, 83 yards in a score in week 4, 78 yards in a score in week 6. They go back to Bryce Young, and then we never hear from Deontay Johnson like ever again. After that, they trade him away. He ends up being, funneled through a couple of teams, never does anything. So it's like, you kind of think about that. You're like, he's doing nothing. When he leaves the team, does nothing. So clearly at that point, like, he was not nearly as good as we thought he was. Just the talent drop off. Like, I don't know, he jumped off like the steepest cliff that he could find. But even with that, Andy Dalton comes in and he's like a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. You sub in Tet McMillan, and there's some upside here. Again, I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen. But basically, you kind of have the 2 outs. The 1 out is Bryce Young figures himself out, plays better, and that benefits Tet McMillan. Or he doesn't figure himself out, they go to Andy Dalton, and that benefits Tet McMillan. So either way, better days should be ahead. And then obviously, he's just going to play better, right? Like, he's just going to improve as a wide receiver. They also play Miami. They play Dallas, like the number 1 matchup you possibly have as a wide receiver. The Jets, like, he's got some pretty easy matchups coming up. So I do think he's going to have 100 yards and a touchdown at some point in the next 3 weeks. And obviously, it'll be much more difficult for you to trade for him after that happens. The third clear buy low right now is Brock Bowers. Been disappointing this season because of the knee injury, but once he sheds the brace, he's going to go back to being one of the most valuable players in all fantasy. So if the Brock Bowers team is struggling, which they probably are, then at least see what it'll take to get him. There have been, a lot of later round tight end hits this season, not necessarily breaking out and being like the next Brock Bowers, right? We know who the top 4 tight ends are. It's going to be Bowers, McBride, Warren, and then Kittle once he's healthy. Like, that is just going to be the top 4 this season, assuming health. And no one's going to break out and kind of jump into that group. Maybe if like Tucker Kraft got super lucky with touchdowns, but the odds are no one's jumping into that group, right? So it's not that these late round tight ends have broken out and they're challenging these guys. It's more so we've had some good options at breakout in the later rounds, and so at tight end. And so if you hit on one of those, you hit on a Hunter Henry, you hit on a Brenton Strange, you hit on some of these guys that have done well. You've hit on a Tyler Warren, you don't need this trade. But if you hit on someone that's pretty decent, I think there's a possibility the Bowers team is like, I need depth, right? Like, they're like, yes, he's been fine, but I need more than fine. If I'm lacking at running back or receiver, maybe they're kind of at that point of the draft where there's been a lot of wide receiver injuries, and so maybe they're just struggling at wide receiver. He's not getting it done, and you can be like, hey, I've got this breakout tight end. They're still playing very well. You can play them every week. And here's also a wide receiver 2. Maybe they've had the running back injuries. Okay, here's a running back 2. I think it's going to take a running back or wide receiver 2 plus kind of a decent tight end that they can start every week. But if you have that, and especially if you have depth at one of running back or wide receiver, I do think it's worth going after. I don't know when he's going to shed the brace, but my guess, kind of looking at things, is about 1 to 2 weeks. It seems like he's only a couple weeks out from not playing with that. And as soon as you hear that he does not have the brace on, it is wheels up for Brock Bowers. Going to go back to being, like, again, one of the most valuable players in fantasy. And once that happens, like, he's basically their wide receiver 1 and will every week have the upside to break fantasy. That is so valuable when we get into the fantasy playoffs. And when it is like you've got to win 3 consecutive games, having a tight end on your team that can go for 120 and a touchdown is so valuable because of the positional advantage it generates. So whenever you're able to acquire someone like that for potentially a discount, you should probably look into it. Those are the clear buys. Onto the sells. First running back I look to sell is Tony Pollard. Really wild how much the Titans are just not using their running backs. Tony Pollard currently the 3rd most featured running back in the NFL. He is getting 91% of the usage for the Titans, and yet he ranks outside the top 20 running backs in total usage and is 29th in half PPR points per game. How is that possible? Cam Ward doesn't throw to running backs, and we know that in any scoring format, even in standard scoring formats, targets to running backs are extraordinarily important for both floor and ceiling. So if he only trails Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley in percentage of your team's usage, yet is outside the top 20 in usage total, and is 29th in points per game, that is not good. It really shows you clearly that the Titans use running backs the least of any team in the NFL. And again, it's not total usage. A carry at the 50-yard line is very different from a carry at the 1-yard line. And a carry at the 50 is very different than a target inside the red zone. The running backs in the Titans are not getting good touches. They're getting touches, but ones that don't matter in fantasy. So at this point, it's scary. Then we're going to have Spears come back. And I don't know if that's going to happen this week, next week, week after, but like soon, Spears is coming back. And so you're going to have Pollard's already non-existent target share drop to like 0. He's going to lose a chunk of his carries. And if this team is going to split 13 expected fantasy points, neither one of these two running backs will be viable. So hopefully someone sees all these rush attempts from Tony Pollard and is like, all right, fine, I'll make a deal for him. I'm really worried about Pollard long term. He's down to running back 32 in their season rankings. Another running back I'd look to trade away is Alvin Kamara. Kamara has by far the lowest target share of his career. Like, it's kind of crazy. You thought going into the year they were going to play fast, right? And it's happened. Like, that was something we didn't necessarily know would be accurate. Like, we figured they would play fast because Kellen Moore always does, but we didn't know if they had the personnel to do it. So if you told me this summer that Kamara would still be their lead back, that they'd be playing as fast as they are, getting as many plays off as they have been, I'd be like, all right, like, he's probably pretty good in fantasy. I mean, not really, because the target share is so low. He's averaging 3.8 yards per reception, 3.9 yards per carry. I'm worried. Last week, they went to Kendre, and it's tough because I think they went to Kendre last week because that's the game plan against Buffalo. You just want maybe a bigger back to run the ball a lot. That's how you beat Buffalo. And honestly, they had a good game plan. Like, they only lost by, what was it, like 12 or 13 points, which, I mean, say they only lost by like 12 or 13 points. But, like, I mean, there's definitely a chance they would have lost by over 20 in that game. You wouldn't have really expected them to stay in it for as long as they did. I'll put it that way. Because they had a good game plan, right? They ran the ball as much as they possibly could. They used their bigger back. Maybe in other games they don't do that. The problem is Kamara, again, is 30 years old, 3.9 yards per carry, 3.8 yards per reception. The Saints are 0-4. They're losing by an average of nearly 14 points per game. And to be fair, it's like, again, they had the good game plan last week. They're playing fast. They have had really difficult matchups. Their upcoming schedule is a lot easier. So it's possible they can pull off a win or two upcoming. But if they lose their next 3 games, which are winnable games, they're not going to be favored, but winnable games, they're definitely losing weeks 8 and 9. They go on bye in week 10. So it feels like at best coming out of their bye, they're going to be like 1 and 9. Maybe a miracle happens and they're like 2 and 8, but they're probably going to be 0 and 10 or 1 and 9. And if that's true, I mean, do we think they're going to be giving Kamara a bunch of touches after that? I don't know. I don't think they're going to. And so I'm just a little bit worried we see like a semi-repeat of last season. Kamara suffers the injury to close last season, but it wasn't that major. It was just like, all right, well, we're 5 and 9. We're not really going to throw you back out there. I mean, that's at 5 and 9. What if he suffers an injury and they're 1 and 9, 1 and 10, 1 and 11? Like, you're not going to see him again. And so, they've got these 2 running backs that are younger. They need to see, this new coaching staff needs to see, can they use Kendre Miller? Obviously, Devin Neal at some point is going to get some run in his rookie season. They got to figure out, can they use him moving forward? It would be smart to give those 2 guys some looks in the second half of the season. And while we don't know that that's going to happen yet, once it becomes evident that they will, it's over. Like, once it becomes obvious that they're completely tanking, they're going to these backups, do you really think you're going to be able to trade Kamara away for anything? So right now, he's been running back 25 in the rest of season rankings. I would take any running back, obviously, that's ranked higher in the rest of season rankings over him. And I think it's possible each week you kind of see that move down. It goes to 26, 27, 28. They keep losing. They go on bye. It comes out of the bye, and Kendre and Neal are getting these touches, and all of a sudden you're like, can I even start him? And if we do get to that point, you're not getting anything. And so I think right now he at least has an okay amount of value because they're not playing horribly. 0-4, but they're not playing horribly. I would just swap out to something else because I feel like the odds are that running back 25 rest season, he ends up moving down past that. And I don't think he's going to move up to like the running back 15. Like it's much more likely, I'll put it this way, that he ends up as the running back like 35 in the rest of the season rankings in like a month and a half than it is he's 15th. Another running back I would sell that I alluded to before is Chuba Hubbard. Panthers stink and they're not even playing fast like the Saints are. Like the one thing you can say about the Saints is yes, they're bad. Yes, they're losing, but they're playing fast. And so at least we get a lot of plays that are at least inefficient. The Panthers don't even get play volume to make up for it. My worry with Chuba is that Rico Dowdle's already playing like 35 to 40% of the snaps. That is way more than any running back was having last season. Again, last season, we talked about this in the summer, he was really good because he was featured. But he was featured because they literally had no one. They had no one else to give touches to. They brought in Rico. They drafted Trevor Etienne, which even though a lot of people don't like him in the fantasy community, the team seems to really like him. So I'm a little bit scared about that long term. But the point is, they're already giving Rico, like, I think it's 39% snaps in back-to-back weeks. And you could argue that it's been because of blowouts, but let's be honest, there's going to be a lot of blowouts for the Carolina Panthers this season. It's less, like it's similar to the Kamara take in that I'm scared long-term that this team starts to tank. They start to look to Trevor Etienne being like, can we utilize him moving forward? And that really hurts Chuba because you need a huge percentage of the touches on really bad teams to produce in fantasy. So similar in that aspect to Kamara, just less so about the age, right? I don't think they're going to like bench Chuba to end the season because he's old, right? He's not old. They gave him a lot of money. Maybe they bench him because they don't want him to get hurt. But I just don't think they're going to completely bench Chuba the way they could bench Kamara in New Orleans. The problem is, even if they don't bench him, if this team is bad and you start to want to get a look at Trevor Etienne rest of season, if he's, losing out on these touches, it's not good. He's only getting 59% of the Panthers running back volume right now. That ranks outside the top 20. If they decide to mix in Etienne, that will drop even further. And if he's only getting half of the expected fantasy points on this backfield on a team that's going to win at most, 4 games this season, I don't know. I just don't really see it. Right now, Chuba's my running back 21 in the rest of the season rankings. Even that does feel a little bit too high. I'd for sure take any of Javonte Williams, Judkins, Benson, as long as the injury isn't bad, Cam Scattaboo. I would be willing to take all those guys over Chuba, and I'd be willing to trade like something else. Like I'd be willing to like add on a wide receiver or something to get one of those running backs instead of Chuba. Another running back I'd look to sell is, unfortunately, Derrick Henry. He doesn't rank inside the top 20 running backs right now in usage. Lamar is expected to miss the next couple of weeks. I don't know if anything's confirmed, but they go on bye in 3 weeks. So I think he's probably going to miss the next 2, go on bye, and return after that. With the defense playing so poorly, like the near-term outlook isn't great. And I think that's the big thing with Derrick Henry. It's not that I think he's playing poorly. He is not. And it's not that I think he doesn't have insane upside in literally any matchup, because he does. And it's not that I'm that worried long-term, as long as with Lamar out these next 2 games, because again, I think it's going to be the next 2 games, as long as they don't go 0-2, because then they push to 1-5, and I get a lot more concerned long-term. If they can go 1-1, then he can come back. They can start to rack up some wins, and they're not going to be out of it later in the season. And they do have some really, really good matchups later in the year. So long-term, I'm not overly concerned, but it's worth noting that that possibility exists, that they don't have Lamar the next 2 weeks. They come out of there by 1-5, and if they get even a little bit unlucky after that, they could be out of the playoffs later in the year, and that would be very, very, very bad if you had Derrick Henry. But the other part of it is, okay, if you're struggling right now and you have Derrick Henry, he is objectively one of, if not the most game script dependent running backs in the NFL. Not a bad running back, one of the best running backs in the NFL. But he's a top 3 running back when they win, and he's a running back 3 when they lose. And so if there's a chance that in this near term, they're just not playing that well without Lamar, and their defense is so bad that teams are getting up and they can't keep up, those are not Derrick Henry games. And so if you're struggling, I don't like the potential outcome in these next 2 weeks. Very difficult matchups. They're playing the Texans and they're playing the Rams. Not good, right? Those are 2 games they're probably going to lose. And so you're a little bit worried that if they get down in these games, if Derrick Henry has 2 more bad games and then goes on bye, if you're already struggling, that could just be kind of a death sentence for you. Like if these next 3 games, if Henry doesn't do anything for you, that might be bad. And so I think that's more so what I'm thinking here is like he's a low-end running back 1 rest of the season, but I would rather James Cook, I'd rather Josh Jacobs, Genty, Hampton. I would take all those running backs straight up over him. I probably prefer Bucky, but I wouldn't want to trade for Bucky just until we kind of know like what his injury is, because you don't want to be like, oh, I need help in the short term and then trade for an injured Bucky Irving. Like that doesn't make a ton of sense. But definitely Cook, Jacobs, Genty, Hampton, for sure take any of them. And I'd probably be willing to do the same thing. Henry plus maybe kind of a lower end wide receiver for one of those guys, especially if you need production in the short term. Then finally, a wide receiver I'd look to sell is DK Metcalf, coming off a breakout game, but that was based on really one long play. The usage this season has just been so much lower than expected, to a degree, like lower than I guess we were hoping for, right? We expected that Arthur Smith does this, right? He just does not utilize one wide receiver more than the others, which is crazy because DK Metcalf is so much better than their other wide receivers, but he just doesn't do it historically. And it's translated into the season. You thought maybe the amount of money that they gave this kid, how much better he is than these other guys, that they would, but they haven't been. And so he's going to have games like he just had where he breaks off that long play, but he's going to have a lot of games where it's just not the production you're hoping for. And I do think that floor is going to hurt you more than the ceiling helps you this season. Right now, he's my wide receiver 28 in the rest of the season rankings. I would take any of Rashee Rice, Ricky Pearsall, Waddle, Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, Mike Evans, assuming you can afford that missed time, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jameson Williams over him. I'd probably take Xavier Worthy as well. My only hesitation with Worthy is I don't 100% know the role once Rice comes back, but I would probably prefer Worthy rest season over DK Metcalf as well. So if you can get any of them, even if you had to add on like a lower end piece to it with Metcalf to get them, I would do that. I'm a little worried, and I'm hoping that someone in your league is like, Metcalf's awesome. He's got that big playability. He scored a couple touchdowns this season, which I think will continue, but I don't like the floor on a weekly basis, so I'd prefer to try and get a little bit more of a stable piece ahead of him. So please, if you are still here, please subscribe while you're down there. If you are new, I'll be back tomorrow to go my week 5 rankings. Then on Friday, to go my favorite underdog plays this week. That'll do it for this one, though. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all on the next one.